This is Dr. Charles Parker, and you're listening to Core Brain Journal. It's a place where I connect both fresh discoveries and interesting different perspectives from advanced mind science with the realities of real people and everyday life down on Main Street.
Well, welcome, folks. Dr. Charles Parker here one more time at Core Brain Journal, and we have another very interesting guest. I mean, do you folks ever get tired of me saying interesting guests? We're just loaded with interesting guests. But this gentleman, Dr. William Shaw, takes the cake. He is a very serious player, has been for years in so many aspects of functional medicine, and is the CEO of Great Plains Labs out in Kansas. So thanks very much for joining us, Dr. Shaw.
Oh, you're welcome, Charles. Glad to participate.
So what we're going to do, folks, is just drop a couple words here from our sponsors to let you know, thank them for being with us. And you listeners already know how much we love the reality of data here at CBJ. And today we welcome our clinical friend and our new sponsor partner, Direct Health Access Laboratory. With over 3 million studies, they are deep leaders of experience with the big picture of measuring, for example, methylation, cryptopyrrole, and copper challenges. They provide global service with a molecular focus. Stay tuned, more at mid-episode here. And then we also are very pleased to welcome our other sponsor, who is really a local person here in Tidewater, Virginia, and that is the Barry Robinson Center. They have a deep interest in fresh options to address the complexity of adolescent treatment failure nationally and internationally, and is built TRICARE friendly. The Barry Robinson Center provides a holistic environment that sets children, teens, and families on the path to healing. From personal experience, I can tell you right now that we've had work with their families, with our families, shared with them, and it's truly a different residential experience. More about them in a moment. So let me introduce Dr. Shaw to you. He's a very, very interesting guy. He's a PhD, board certified in the fields of clinical chemistry and toxicology by the American Board of Clinical Chemistry. Before he founded the Great Plains Laboratory in Lenexa, Kansas, Dr. Shaw worked for the Centers for Disease Control and Children's Mercy Hospital, the University of Missouri at Kansas City School of Medicine, SmithKline Laboratories, and he is, importantly, this is a book that really first connected me with Dr. Shaw. He's the author of Biological Treatments for Autism and PDD, Pervasive Developmental Disorder, originally published in 1998. And he has another book that's more recent, 2009, Autism Beyond the Basics. And one of the things I think is so absolutely relevant is how Dr. Shaw pulls so much diverse information together in useful packages that you can get, and you can say, why wasn't I doing this earlier? And I think you're going to have that reaction to our meeting today. He's a frequent speaker at conferences worldwide. I happened to hear him up at the Integrative Medicine for Mental Health Conference in D.C. This past year, when I think it was in the spring. And they have another Integrative Medicine for Mental Health Conference coming up in Orange County, September 28th, October 1st. And he's the thought leader for that entire conference. So he did a presentation there, which really struck me hard. I had heard about it. I knew about this test, but I wasn't really familiar with it. And I still have a lot to learn about it. So you'll be sharing with me a learning experience here. But it's about using Great Plains, it's a toxic test, GPL tox test, to really see what's going on with the toxins. You all will remember that we had Dr. Pizzorno here talking about toxin solutions. And so this is Dr. William Shaw, who's got the measurement tool, which is so doggone important. So with that, that's a brief intro. There's so much more to say about you, Dr. Shaw. But with that, could you just give our listeners a little bit about who you are personally, your mission, and where you are in the development of your thinking about this evolution in mind science that includes toxicology?
Yeah, so glad to do it. So the testing that I've developed really fulfills a lifetime wish to to make toxic chemical testing available to the general public. In essence, what I realized is that it's virtually impossible for the average person to know what they're being bombarded with throughout the world. And so many people don't realize that their health is dependent on these chemicals that have been exposed to. And it was so difficult for anybody to find out what it was, because in order to most of the testing, you had to know in advance what you were exposed to. And what I can say is it's rare that a person has knowledge of which chemical they're exposed to. It does happen, like a person who works in a factory that produces one chemical and then they get sick, like the people who worked at the factories that produce tetraethyl lead for gasoline. So large numbers of those people got sick or died from that exposure. But the majority of things we're being exposed to, I would say 90% of the time, the person doesn't know which chemical they're being exposed to. And so they can't order that. If they had to order these tests one at a time, it might cost them $20,000 to do testing for a lot of the most common chemicals. So what I wanted to do was develop a relatively economical test around $200 that would check for the majority of chemicals that many people are exposed to. So the testing that we developed, called GPL Tox, checks for 172 different chemicals. And in addition, it can be done on a simple urine test. And we have extremely good data. So to tell the person not only do they have that chemical, but how much they have and how much their exposure compares to the average person, with the idea that if you're extremely elevated, it's much more likely that whatever medical complaints you have is due to that particular factor. So we've seen that time and time again with our new test, the GPL Tox, that people with high values, meaning at the 95th percentile or more, these values are affecting their health. And the people in which it's almost the complete cause of their health issue is when they get into multiples, not just at the 95th percentile, but 5 times, 10 times, as much as 50 times the 95th percentile. Those are the cases where it's a slam dunk conclusion that this particular chemical is the major cause of their illness. So this is something that has never been done before, and so I'm very happy to make this. I can say already this has changed the lives of many people who had no idea of what they were dealing with.
Well, I think, Dr. Shaw, the thing is so absolutely striking is the variety, the wide variety of psychiatric conditions, of brain conditions. I like to not really think about psychiatry in that closed way that, hey, we're just going to give psych medicines, but what do we think about actual brain function and biomedical function downstream from these? Because, I mean, everywhere from autism to bipolar illness to Parkinson's to Alzheimer's, I mean, the list goes on. It's just amazing when you go to the website, which I'll have linked in the show notes, and you go over to Great Plains Labs and look at what the definitive studies that they have there. It's nothing less than phenomenal. Every single person listening to this has to go over there and just take a look at the resources and the research that Dr. Shaw and his team have done. So, Dr. Shaw, how did you get into this? I knew you were interested in autism early on, and I knew that you had done some original work in that, but then how did you actually come over to really discover and see for yourself, as we all do as we get older? It's like, hey, here's something I really need to dig further into. What led you down that path?
Well, I guess the first thing goes back to my education in graduate school, and there was a particular case study that was presented to us in the biochemistry class, and it was by the head of the biochemistry department of the medical school where I got my PhD, and he related a story of a neighbor of his who was a lawyer in downtown Charleston. So Charleston is a peninsula, and two major rivers close around it on either side. And his lawyer friend lived on the other bank of the river and had to cross a large bridge to get to his downtown office every day. And what he related to my professor is that he was thinking of leaving the field of law. And so, of course, he asked him, well, why are you doing that? Well, he said, every day I start out, I'm in a very good mood and, on top of the world, and then I drive across the Cooper River Bridge and get downtown, and just about the time I'm ready to put the key in the door of my office, I feel terribly depressed. And so I think that's the, I'm getting hints from my unconscious that the field of law must be bad for me because I'm feeling so good when I start, but soon as I get near my office, that's it. And so my professor said, I want you to do something. He said, tomorrow when you come to work, I want you to drive across the bridge again, just like always, but instead of turning right to your law office, turn left where the medical school lab was. And so he said, okay. And what he did is he took the sample after he had spent about 30 minutes commuting to work, and he found that the individual had an extremely high value of carbon monoxide. And one of the things that carbon monoxide causes is extreme depression, as well as a variety. There's articles published showing that kleptomania, just going in and shoplifting, can be a neurologic disorder caused by carbon monoxide poisoning. And of course, carbon monoxide is one of the chemicals that not only can it cause depression, but it can kill you. So one of the easiest things to remember that, to my knowledge, is true of every toxic chemical is if the chemical is toxic enough to kill you at some level, it's also capable of causing severe depression or other types of psychiatric illness. Mm-hmm. And so that's proven a very useful tool to remember. Is you can just say, is this chemical something that has caused death at some level? If it is, it's definitely capable of impairing your brain's ability to function. And this is especially important for humans because humans have one of the largest brains of any of the mammals, perhaps, except for the great apes and the whales. And the brain is one of the most metabolically active. When you're sitting, of course, the brain is the single most metabolically active. The only exception would be your muscles if you were doing extreme exercise, but that only takes place for a limited time period, whereas your brain is going 24 hours a day. So your brain is by far your most sensitive organ as far as toxic chemical exposure. And really, a toxic chemical exposure is going to frequently cause a whole variety of psychiatric illness. And reviewing this, I mean, it's not only depression and kleptomania, but it can be anxiety. It can be attention deficit with hyperactivity. It can be autism. It can be Alzheimer's disease. It can be Parkinson's disease. So all of these toxic chemical exposures have the ability to cause severe impairment of your brain function. And the most common way in which they cause this is by impairing the function of the mitochondria, the organelle in the cells that is like a battery that produces energy in the form of a chemical called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And if enough of this is inhibited, you're not going to function well at all.
So the brain just plain old slows down.
And so this was the brain slows down, and then I also became interested because of learning about the toxicity of these antibacterial hand soaps, many of which are still on the market. There was one that used to be on the market called hexachlorophene that was present in it for teenagers who had acne, but they weren't content to just having it in soap. They were putting it in toothpaste and mouthwash and feminine hygiene deodorant. And what was found out is that eventually they found 12 children had died after being washed with this soap. And the hexachlorophene was extremely toxic. And when you looked at some of the underlying data, they found that it could cause extreme depression. So at the laboratory where I worked, I found that about the company, at that time it was SmithKline, used this antibacterial hand soap in all the employees' bathrooms, and about 50% of the employees were complaining about feeling pain in the chest or headaches or depression after going on break. So what it was is I tracked it down. Those were if the person ended up washing their hands before break, a large percentage of those people were getting toxic symptoms just from washing their hands, a small surface area of the body, where sometimes this same chemical was used promoted as soap to use when showering, when you would put it over your entire body. And those were the cases where the children were dying when they their entire body was exposed to this antibacterial thing, and so eventually it was removed from the market. But just like in many other cases, what they do, they take away one toxic chemical and they put in another one with similar toxicity. Matter of fact, the chemical structure of the replacements was very similar. For example, PCMX has a very similar biochemical structure in that it is a chlorinated phenolic compound. And triclosan, which was recently banned by the FDA, had that same characteristics. Well, today you can go into McDonald's and Burger King. If you wash your hands there, you're getting a dose of this toxic chemical. And when I looked up, I found that they had tried this out on animals and found severe symptoms like neurologic impairment and depression caused in dogs that had been exposed to this chemical, and really, I mean, it's really bad. Most people make the assumption that the government would never allow something like this, and I have to say, this is that if you're waiting for the government to help you with this, you might as well be waiting for the tooth fairy to be doing that. So it's just not going to happen. You really have to look out for yourself and the toxic exposures that you receive. Just because it's in a package in the grocery store or the pharmacy does not mean that product is safe. And so the testing gives consumers a way to find out what they're actually being exposed to. So, for example, I only eat organic food because my wife is that's what she buys at the Whole Foods market. Mm-hmm. But even there, we go out to eat occasionally for lunch and so forth, and I have traces of organophosphate pesticide in my urine sample, but not a lot. You find some people who have values that are 30 times the 95th percentile, and those people are extremely ill. They're people that have extreme chronic fatigue or extreme depression or autism or severe attention deficit. So these things, they can cause a whole variety of medical problems, and unless the public is checking these things out, they will not be able to find a physician who can help them with their symptoms, because these symptoms are due to toxic chemicals that are not commonly tested. They're almost never tested unless the person has knowledge that these particular tests exist.
Well, Dr. Shaw, this is the very reason we're really privileged to have you here talking with us, because this is absolutely so essential. It's right on the theme of what we talk about all the time at Core Brain Journal. We're really strong on measuring and measuring correctly, because we see so many individuals, we're sort of living in a psychiatric delusion, if you will, that medications are going to fix everything, and that the brain itself is so simple that if you look at the behavior of a person, you'll know the right chemical to throw at it. And the complexity is just so much greater than that. It's one of the reasons I was interested in listening to you and developing a working relationship with you many years ago, because I heard you speak many years ago up in New England, and I was like, boy, this guy is right on it, because I myself, as a practicing psychiatrist, have seen so many treatment failures when I was, in fact, doing everything right. I mean, I was doing everything right by every book, and people are treatment failure. We have horrendous numbers of treatment failure out there that look psychiatric, that in fact, from the point of view of appearances, are psychiatric. But from the point of view of what the underlying problem is, they have significant underlying biologic impediments. And I'm so glad that you're raising this. And I'm really interested in becoming more conversant with it. I've ordered some tests already with GPL Tox, because I have to just make it part of my practice. Actually, while I'm talking to you, I keep thinking, why don't I just do this routinely with I see so many individuals who are treatment failure. They come in and they say, well, I've been on 6 different medications and tried this and that. And that treatment failure is so pervasive, and you don't know what their habits are. You don't know what they've been eating. You don't know where they've been. You know what their situation is. The guy with the carbon monoxide. I mean, who would ever predict that he had a leak carbon monoxide in his car? You don't know that until you test for it. So thank you so much for bringing that to our conscious awareness here. Now, let me ask you another question. The issue is, how frequently do you see individuals that really don't have an array of symptoms that still have fairly significant positive findings, who are more minimally impaired in a certain respect? And what does that say to us about being more liberal with our testing so we can actually prevent long-term, so they don't just keep polluting themselves on throughout their lives?
Yeah. So what I would say is, I would say somewhere between a third to a half of patients that go into the doctor's office for a variety of complaints. We actually don't get many samples from people who are completely healthy, but we get a variety of patients whose urine samples come through our facility, and I would say between 1/3 to 1/2 have significant abnormalities that are either contributing to symptoms or, in a lot of cases, the major cause of the person's illness. So one particular patient had symptoms of Huntington's disease, a disease where there's severe tremors, severe psychiatric symptoms, ataxia, psychosis, and this woman had about 6 different toxic chemicals that were at the higher than the 95th percentile. So undoubtedly with this woman, this was the major cause. And she's still undergoing treatment right now. This is a relatively recent case, but she had a significant improvement by detoxification. And let me talk a little bit about the most common ways of doing this. So let
me interrupt you for just a second, Dr. Shaw, because that was my secret question that I was going to ask you after we took a quick break, because that you have driven right to the point. I mean, this is such a comprehensive and interesting conversation. I mean, I wish we could talk for 2 hours, but let's come back in just a moment after we hear a word from our sponsors, and we'll talk to Dr. Shaw about what can be done. Let's not just wring our hands here, folks. Let's look at solutions. That's what we're all about. So we'll be back in just a second with Dr. Shaw's answer to that question. Well, folks, you know as well as I do that psychiatric treatment failure, especially after multiple medication trials and those very, very brief hospitalizations, may prove insufficient to deal at home with the complexity of troubled children and those adolescents from 6 to 17 years old. Improved care, those next mandatory steps, should include a more comprehensive approach to address those multiple levels of challenges, from family to peers to school, diagnostically from defiance to depression, on every level for families, including military families internationally. The Barry Robinson Center's 32-acre open college-like campus in Norfolk, Virginia, provides safety and security and clean, comfortable living. How do we know? We refer folks over there all the time, strongly endorse what they're doing. So for further information, an informed interview, connect at this page, barryrobinson.org/core. Well, you folks already know that here at Core Brain Journal, we're on a mission to introduce you to resources that make significant contributions to the investigation of those predictable mind science applications. Our colleagues at DHA Lab Group provide a real difference with treatment options for people at every level, from first awareness of mind problems to those frustrating times when even well-informed treatment becomes surprisingly unpredictable. For my entire professional life, from psychoanalysis to brain scans, I've searched for, yes, improved predictability. The good news for all of us, from professionals to patients, remarkably effective research offers useful, cost-effective, organic options far beyond guesswork with psychiatric medications alone. DHA lab tests measure unbalanced biomedical details through easily available testing, now available globally for a variety of molecular answers from, for example, methylation, copper, and cryptopyrrole challenges. Check in for more details at dhalab.com core. That's dhalab.com /core. Well, welcome back, folks. Here we are. And Dr. Shaw, this is such an interesting conversation. Our audience, I'm there. I mean, if you're driving to work, you're just going to have to sit in the car till you finish this conversation, because this is absolutely so pervasively relevant globally. This isn't something that's just happening out in Idaho. I mean, this is a very, very big deal. So that was the question that I think a lot of people were just beginning to develop. All of our thoughts and trains of thought were going on the same line. What do we do about it once we start to see it? And I know we can't even cover all of the things we can do about it, but please do take a moment to go and complete your sentence. You were talking about what we can do about detoxing and how we can handle these terrible results.
So one of the first things is try to find out what you've been exposed to. And this isn't obvious. These organophosphates can be in any food that you eat. And even if you only eat organic food at home, almost everybody eats out. And there's extremely few restaurants that use only organic food. And so there's a good chance that could be the food you've eaten. It could have been the exterminator came around because you had some ants or cockroaches and they're spraying these extremely toxic chemicals. Could be because you're in the part of the country that had a lot of the mosquitoes where the Zika virus was. We've seen children from that area who have sky high values of many toxic chemicals because of the overreaction. And so because of fear of the Zika virus, the people are being covered with extremely toxic pesticides that may be a lot more toxic than the Zika virus itself is. Mm. So you need to identify which toxic chemicals you've been exposed to and try to prevent that in the future if you can. That's number one. Number two is there are a number of chemicals that are detoxified using glutathione. Glutathione is like the master molecule of detoxification, and it's something that's very safe to take as a supplement. Glutathione reacts with hundreds or even thousands of toxic chemicals and combines with them to make a form of the molecule that can be excreted from the body in the urine and in the feces very efficiently. So
you can just take a glutathione supplement, Dr.
Yes.
Shaw? Yeah.
You can take the supplement, or if you're extremely ill, perhaps at the beginning you want to consider doing intravenous, called IV treatment at the beginning of the therapy. And the third is one of the most successful, which is the sauna treatment. So thousands of people were exposed to toxic chemicals because of the World Trade Center attack and 9/11, and they were exposed to hundreds of different chemicals, and so it was offered to them to use sauna treatment to detoxify. And I've talked to a number of the people who were rescue workers at this attack, and they talk about how depressed and how severe their fatigue was after this exposure, and how all of this was reversed by doing intensive sauna therapy. And most types of sauna will work. There are different types out there, but the feedback I've gotten is that most types of sauna will function very well. And I've seen pictures. So the people who've had this treatment, after a period of time, they can actually see the toxic chemicals oozing out of their body. And I've got, I've got pictures of this showing the people with their skin covered with yellow, red, and black stuff that's coming out of the skin on their arms after the sauna treatment. So it's very common. A lot of people will smell the chemicals as they're coming out, or sometimes even their breath that will smell like the chemicals that they were exposed to in the past. So sauna is one of the best treatments there is for getting rid of these things, and so it's just a good health measure overall, is to do frequent sauna treatments to get these things out. And it's very important that once you've developed sweating in the sauna, you need to make sure it's removed right away, or it can be absorbed back into the body. So that's a very important feature, either to towel off frequently to get that sweat off, and also to shower, perhaps even shower periodically if you're doing a long sauna treatment to get rid of the toxic chemicals that are coming out. So we've done studies and we've seen that high amounts of these toxic chemicals are in the sweat of the individual going through the sauna treatment. So it's extremely important, as I mentioned, that the vast majority of these thousands of workers received the sauna treatment, and that it worked very effectively. Large numbers of them had neurologic improvement, had their overall health improved, had fatigue improved, a whole variety of different symptoms appeared after resolved after doing the sauna treatment. There's a particular treatment called the Hubbard technique that uses in which the person takes a number of vitamins, particularly niacin. Niacin helps to mobilize some of these chemicals out into from the fat tissue and out into the sweat.
Well, you know, Dr. Shaw, we have your colleagues there at Great Plains have given us a PDF download, and we're going to have it here as a freebie that somebody can come in and just download when they go to the website and pull down the information that's readily available. This brief conversation, it may sound complex. It is complex when you get into it on the surface. But what happens is, to decrease the complexity, it just takes a little more study, a little more patience, and getting into it. And we want to make sure that people go to the website and pull that down, because that is going to be an easy, useful resource. And listeners, let me tell you, Dr. Shaw is, if not the pioneer, he's certainly one of the few pioneers in the world. He's taken some time to tell us about this. This guy is a thought leader on this very subject. We're so pleased to have him here. And there's so many things to talk about. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. So let me ask you this one question. What's your opinion? This is a little bit on the edge, but you have so much experience with the relevance of GPL tox findings with specifically autism, because I think autism is one of those conditions that everybody is like, what do we do? This is a hopeless case. This kid's going to be this way the rest of their lives. Could you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, so I was shocked to find out that most of the children with autism have the highest amount of toxic chemicals of any group I've tested. So it's common to see elevated values, but also values that are 10, 20, or 30 times higher than the 95th percentile, which is already the highest level of exposure.
Oh my gosh.
So there are a gigantic amount of toxic chemicals. And what we've already found out is that you can remove them, and you can reduce the symptoms of autism by using the same sauna treatment. Just a few months ago, I published on another extremely toxic chemical called glyphosate. If you, many of you could go down to your nearby hardware store and find this chemical in the weed killers out there. It's become one of the most toxic chemicals on earth that is extremely easy to get hold of. Something like 95% or more of our corn and soy are now contaminated with glyphosate. Glyphosate is a weed killer, which is called technically an herbicide, and it has a unique feature that it reacts against a certain metabolic pathway that was found in plants. And so in essence, this is all plants. So what the company Monsanto did was they bred corn that had maybe 100 or 200 times as much DNA to make the enzymes that glyphosate attacked. And by having massive overdose of these biochemical pathways in the plant, the corn was able to not be killed by the glyphosate. So the idea is that this genetically modified corn could then be planted where the weeds grew up. The whole field could be sprayed, but only the weeds would be killed. And what a weed just means is any plant that you don't want to be there. And so as a result of that, of course, the corn itself becomes contaminated with glyphosate, but is not killed. But people ask me all the time, oh, all I have to do is wash it, right, before I eat it. Well, no, that glyphosate goes through the plant and through the roots, and every single iota of that corn is contaminated with glyphosate. And so you could wash forever, and the glyphosate is still going to be in that food. And it's also used to harvest other crops that even are not GMO, like rice and wheat and sugar cane. So you can get exposure from other foods that are not even GMO. It's being used for other purposes as well. So the makers of the GMO plants claim, well, this is safe for humans because humans have different biochemical pathways than plants do. And that was true. The problem is that our intestinal flora has exactly the same biochemical pathways that the weeds do. And so all of our beneficial flora, like the lactobacillus and bifidobacteria, when we eat foods that contain glyphosate, those beneficial bacteria are killed, but the harmful bacteria like Clostridia and Salmonella are not susceptible to glyphosate. And so the beneficial bugs are being killed, and the harmful organisms are in effect being stimulated because they have no competition, so they can reach very high levels. So in the study I recently published, it showed that it was triplets, two of which had autism and one is suspected seizure disorder with impaired growth, and showed that all three of these children had extremely high amounts of glyphosate, values that were about 30 times the average value that people have. And what they were doing is, it was a Hispanic family, and of course, corn tortillas are one of the ethnic favorites for this group, and they were eating large amounts of corn tortillas every day. And so this was likely the source of their extremely high glyphosate.
Mhm.
And when I tested them for the presence of Clostridia, the two with autism had extremely high metabolites of Clostridia bacteria. And the Clostridia bacteria produce compounds, one of which is measured in the Great Plains organic acid test called HPHPA. HPHPA has the ability to alter the neurotransmitters in the peripheral nervous system in the brain, and the enzyme that they affect is called dopamine beta hydroxylase, which is needed to convert dopamine to norepinephrine. And because that enzyme is knocked out by the Clostridia, the dopamine reaches very high levels and in effect becomes toxic. So dopamine at normal levels works fine, but when it reaches very high levels, it gets converted to toxic metabolites that actually can destroy the function of the neuron and eventually the function of the entire brain. So this is what I think that we can now say, that one of the causes of autism is likely due to the widespread exposure of glyphosate. As a matter of fact, if you plot the incidence of autism versus the use of glyphosate in agriculture, it's virtually 100% correlation.
Oh my gosh.
The autism hardly existed as an illness before the introduction of glyphosate. And people will say, of course, well, correlation is not cause. But I think taking this information together, the fact that glyphosate kills beneficial bacteria, a number of studies have now shown that Clostridia is rampant in autism, and lots of studies have shown that the chemicals produced by the Clostridia cause the excessive dopamine. I think we have a theory that I think is going to stick. I think there's that the odds are that this is a major cause of autism, and perhaps the major cause of autism throughout the world. This work has been replicated now throughout the world in Turkey and Italy and China, in addition to my own work. And so this abnormality is extremely common in autism and would help to explain all the kinds of things that are going on in autism. It also helps to explain why drugs like Risperdal, which are directed against excess dopamine, are effective in autism, in the severe forms of autism.
Well, Dr. Shaw, I hate to wind this up. You are a remarkable guest. I mean, you are just laying it out there like there's no tomorrow. And actually, what I think is so relevant as we're closing here, and I really hate to wind this up because it's so interesting talking to you, but we really do have to push on. I just want to say, first of all, I want to say thank you. I want to say that the close that you had as we're bringing this episode, this brief interview to closure, is that we really need to, in anybody that has significantly pervasive mind illness of some kind, mind imbalances, this just needs to be a ubiquitous test. We just need to get it out of the way. It's like doing a CBC. We just have to do it. It's not like, let's think about it, maybe we'll do that later. We need to get on it and make it happen. So with that, Dr. Shaw, give us the URL for Great Plains, which a lot of us know, and we'll then send our guests over there, and we'll have it on the show notes as well.
Yeah, so we have a long one, but I'm going to give you the simple one, which is GPL, the acronym for Great Plains Laboratories. So GPL4U.com. So GPL, the number 4, the letter U.com. GPL4U.com. So real simple, easy to remember, that Great Plains is for you.
Well, we've been using them for a long time. We really appreciate our opportunity to work with you. You're really helping the folks out that I see every day, and we just appreciate the opportunity of you coming here and really spreading the word on some really deep, important knowledge that really needs to be appreciated by more people. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Charles.
You have a good day, and we'll talk soon. Thanks for listening to Core Brain Journal. We're working every day behind the scenes to bring you reports that connect research benches with those street trenches. Here we share the complexity of mind science because, as you know, details really do matter. One of the most pervasive, misunderstood challenges is how commonplace medications, like those written for ADHD, are used so regularly without clear guidelines. If you think you'd like more specifics, take a minute to download my 2-page PDF packed with video links and references on the absolute essentials of how to start ADHD medications. They're easily available at corebrainjournal.com/start. Thanks for listening. Do connect and stay tuned. Together we can make a difference.